Okay, guys, AQA Chem, paper 3, high yield topics and predictions. Okay, hopefully this is your last exam. Let's go into this one. I know AQA has been pretty brutal so far, but let's see what's going on. But real quick, before we look at the analysis and the topics and all that, if you guys are struggling, if you guys are stressing with the required practical side of things for paper 3, check out the link down below and grab yourself a cheeky required practical resource pack. All right, it's going to have every single tested required practical exam question from 2017 to 2024. And to go alongside that, you're going to have a PDF of all the information you need to be able to know with hand-picked stuff straight out of the mark schemes. Okay, so if you guys are stressing, grab that and it should help you a lot. All right, let's do this. So for the topics, we've got rate, equation, and kinetics right at the start, okay? Then we have energetics and thermodynamics, carboxylic acids and derivatives, transition metals, acids and bases, amount of substance, electric potentials. Basically, all the high yield topics from paper 1 and paper 2 are also the high yield topics for paper 3. Okay, remember, this is section A only, so this does not include the multiple choice questions. We'll look at that separately. Okay, so if I was you, I would start at the top and work my way down for that A star. Okay, that's what most of you guys are going for. The only ones which are all the way up the top with the highest marks, which are not present every year, is rate equations and kinetics, which again, highly linked more so to rate equations than kinetics, but I've combined them for the purposes of required practical 3 and required practical 7. And then you have energetics and thermodynamics, which are also combined for required practical 2. Okay, so all the stuff that goes along with these two topics, it has not come up every single year, but when it has come up, it's got some bad boy marks. Okay, so I'd 100% be going through all this stuff. We'll look at the predictions a little bit later in the video, but even though they haven't come out every single year, this is what I would be banging out in my revision time, YouTubing the videos, going through my required practical resource, all that stuff, okay, doing those past paper questions. Then from there, just work your way down the list, guys. Honestly, just work your way down the list. There's going to be some things I mentioned in my predictions that you may want to focus on a bit more so, but we'll look at that in a sec, okay? Now, this is just the overall marks across the years, okay? And the average marks when that topic did appear. But what we can look at in a little bit more detail is the trends, okay? The trends are really important because they essentially show the up-down sort of how the exams were looking by a topic, okay? So we can see that there was a 5-year occurrence of rate equations and kinetics. We had a 0 in 2017, 2021, and 2023. Okay, stuff like this is really important to look at. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail, but you should instantly be able to see where the zeros are from 2024. Okay, so because there's so many topics that they can pick from for paper 3, it's quite hard to predict. However, you can kind of go off of what was present or lacking in paper 1 and 2, and you can also think about which topics they heavily favor for the required practical side of things. So that would be obvious ones like rate equations, energetics, carboxylic acids. These 3 are super favored for the required practicals. Okay, and then you got acids and bases as well. Electric potentials a little bit, but not so much. But you can see the trends that are going on. I've also color-coded, like traffic light, color-coded all of these tables as we go through here, right? Just for the last 3 years, because I thought that would be a good sort of reference point where you can see what has been missing for the last 3 years that is normally present in the prior years, okay? But this is paper 3 section A alone, so you also have to consider all papers, which we'll look at in a second, okay? But if you guys want to sort of screenshot this so you know what could come up this year based on what was absent last year, you can do your own thing. But I'm going to go through the predictions anyway in a little bit, so no stress there. The other thing is coefficient of variation, which is, you can see, is quite high compared to the other papers for paper 3 specifically. So there's a lot of variation. That's why it's so hard to predict. Okay, when you get these lower COVs, if anyone's not aware, COV is just the ratio between standard deviation and the mean, and it just shows variability across a time period. Okay, so if you've got 30%, that means that the average marks is close to the actual marks that appeared on that paper when it did appear. Okay, but you can see here that like we have a frequency of 1, 6, and obviously that total marks is 6, so the average is going to be 6. Okay, you're not going to divide it by 8, you just divide it by the frequency itself. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So you can kind of ignore COV for this because the lower ones aren't important. You want to be focusing all your time up here, regardless of what the COV is. Okay, pretty much the gist of this video. Okay, and here's a nice cheeky little curve, what I'm on about, graph to show you sort of what the topic spread is like. So obviously, do rate equations and kinetics, do energetics and thermodynamics, do your carboxylic acid derivatives, practicals, esterification, everything that goes along with that, and then just work your way down. And you can see you're going to get a lot of limited return on your revision investment if you go down here, okay? But that's not to say that nothing here cannot come up in paper 3. It's just that, you know, so far, historically, they haven't shown preference to it. All right, so that's really important. If you're new to my videos, this does not mean that these ones will 100% come up and nothing else will, or they'll come up for definite low marks. That's not the case. You just got to go off the history and just see what's going on. But AQA has been on a pretty mad one so far with paper 1 and paper 2. I don't know what they've been doing so far. I haven't seen the papers, but I've heard some pretty shocking things. So yeah, take it with a grain of salt, guys. Honestly, it's just predictions. It's just sort of gambling and guessing at the end of the day. Section B is where we're going to move on to now. So the MCQs. So section A is going to be generic synoptic stuff mixed with required practicals, and section B is all about the MCQs, okay? But as you can see, a lot of the highest yield MCQ questions also belong to the highest yield section A questions. Okay, so that's important to know. So like if you're going to revise transition metals, which I'm aware has already come up along paper 1, but let's say you were going to revise it right, it's also present in the MCQs, and it only received 1 mark last year. So they may bump something into there for the MCQs this year, who knows? Acids and bases, bonding has received a lot of marks for MCQs because it's, you know, it's pretty easy to design and create basic bonding MCQ questions where you have to pick something. And then there's polymers, which came up a lot this year. So I'm not really expecting too much, and it came up for 3 months last year. So I'm not really expecting much on polymers, to be honest. But they may go ham on polymers and put a ton of stuff in there as well. Carboxylic acid and derivatives were pretty high last year. So I'm not too sure if it's going to come up much this year. Amount of substance, amino acids, proteins, DNA is next. Group 7 and atomic structure, and then it dips down there below 10 marks. Okay, so the MCQs are like almost impossible to predict. They can literally pick anything they want. They can associate it with general content theory. They can associate it with required practical stuff. They can literally do whatever they want. Calculations, graphs, it's just a wild west, okay? So MCQs, super hard to predict. As long as you know the high yield topics really well, you should be okay for the most part in MCQs anyway, because a lot of it can be deduced from like fundamental chemistry knowledge, as well as the basic stuff you have to memorize for each topic. All right, so MCQs, the best approach is just to practice as many MCQs as possible. If you have the knowledge, you should be able to use process of elimination to solve them normally anyway. Okay, but MCQs are kind of like their own mini game inside the exams. They have their own time management, they have their own process. So just make sure you go away and practice some of that sort of stuff. Maybe just find some YouTube videos on generic MCQ advice. But you should be fine. Okay, now we've done section B. Let's look at all the papers. So every paper 1, 2, and 3 across the years to see what is normally present as a high yield topic, but was pretty damn low last year, or pretty damn high. So the inverse as well, just to see maybe what is coming up this year that is going to be, was absent last year or really high last year. Okay, so let's check out what's going on. Energetics and thermodynamics. It received a decent amount of marks last year, pretty close to the average, but still below. So I expect this to actually go up a little bit. Amount of substance is going to go up because it's barely been on the paper so far to my knowledge. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a decent amount incorporating amount of substance calculations, whether that's the MCQ or section A, not too sure. I think there's going to be more on rate equations than kinetics. We received a ton of marks last year, 32 marks. So that's like almost the highest with 2018 at 35 marks. I think this is going to dip down to the mid to low 20s, but I still think there's more questions to be asked that weren't asked in paper 2. So I'd be revising this for sure. Acids and bases, there was a lot of acids and bases last year, and there has been some acids and bases already with pH curves and stuff like that as well. So I don't think they'll lean into this too much for the required practical side of things. It's been at around 20 marks for the last 4 years, so I expect it to be around the same, if not dipping overall. I haven't actually seen paper 1, so I don't know how many acids and bases questions there were, but if it was less than 20 marks, I'm assuming that some will come up in paper 3, section A, or the MCQs. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time going through this. I've already got sort of the predictions written down. So feel free to screenshot this, take a look at it, see what's going on. But you can see here, guys, basically every topic comes up every single year to a degree. It may only be 2 marks, maybe 5 marks or whatever, but it will come up. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the stuff that was tested in paper 3 2024, is tested in paper 3 2023. So these are obviously like discrete. These are 2 separate things. It's not like they were tested in both papers, right? And then also low marks or absent this year so far. Okay, so let's actually go into this straight away, because there's been a few things that were just low or really weird out of AQA. So rate equations, I expect more stuff to come up on rate equations. Like I said, it's one of the highest yield topics for, it's literally the highest yield topic for section A. So I expect this to come up, even though it came up for a lot of marks last year. Okay, so I'd be revising rate equations myself. To my understanding, everything apart from Arrhenius graph is what I'd be going for, because they've already tested on Arrhenius. So I've heard anyway. The next weirdest one, KP and KC, where are you at, man? Where are you at? I don't know what is going on here, because KP has been in every single year, 8 years in a row, and KC has also been present quite a lot in paper 2 as well. So I don't know what they're thinking here. I don't know where they're going to go with this, because equilibrium is such a core, like, fundamental concept in Chem. So I don't really know what they're doing, to be honest. The only other thing I can think of is they may go kind of random and try and combine equilibria with an organic topic. So for example, there's equilibria application to esterification, because you can have the esterification reaction going forwards to form the ester and the water, or you can go backwards and hydrolyze it in the acidic conditions. So they may do something to do with that. Or they could do maybe KC in industry, some sort of weird application question. I don't really know where they can go with this, but I think there could be KP and KC present at least in the MCQs, guys. At least in the MCQs. They haven't ever asked a question on KP in Section 8, Paper 3. So it's kind of weird, because it's been absent entirely. I don't really know what kind of question they could ask. So I expect them to lean more into KC with Paper 3. But I honestly don't know. They might do like 3 marks for each for MCQs. Who knows? Honestly, this is kind of a weird year, so I can't really say, but I would be revising KP and KC anyway, just because it's such an easy topic and you have to apply the knowledge on a lot of other topics anyway. Next up, thermodynamics, energetics. So you got the required practical 2, calorimetry, you got all the calcs associated with it. You got the Born-Haber, okay? Then you've got the solution, hydration, and lattice dissociation or formation enthalpy. So you've got the equations that go with that, the Hess cycle, the calorimetry experiment as well. So there's a bunch of stuff they can combine for thermodynamics and energetics. So I would be revising the hell out of that to make sure that they don't bring it up this year, because as I understand it, it's been pretty absent from paper 1, and it's the second highest yield topic for section A. So I'd be all over that. What was it looking like last year? 2024. Was 0 marks in paper 3, guys, and then 3 marks in 2023. So even though it received a lot of marks across all the papers, 23 overall in 2024 and 32 overall in 2023, I would be revising it, okay? Next up is all the basic year 13 organics that has barely shown its head. All right, amines, I don't think has come up at all. Aldehydes and ketones, carboxylic acids and derivatives, so all the stuff that hasn't come up for those topics so far. That is what I'd be revising, just to make sure, like, all the organic synth, just everything associated with it, base strength of amines, all that sort of stuff that they could potentially ask 5 or 6 marker questions on, and also potentially link it with practicals in some way. And then we had a ton, as far as I've heard, about polymers, all that milk and cheese stuff that was going on. But I would say I would be revising a little bit on amino acids and TLC, so thin layer chromatography, for the required practical 12 and stuff like that, because they haven't asked anything on this yet, so it could come up. Okay, so that's the stuff that's been low marks or absent for paper 1 and 2 2025. Think through yourselves, guys. Think through this as well, because I haven't actually seen the papers. So if you guys clock something that I missed, put it in the comments and let people know. So let's see what was tested paper 3 2024. So last year we had rate equations mass loss practical was tested. This is the graphical one. Look at my required practical resource or look at paper 3 2024 to see what I'm talking about here. But essentially, I don't expect them to do another mass loss practical. They may do a different rate equations practical or orders or something like that to test you on this year, right? So, but I'm pretty sure they're going to go deeper into rate equations at least a little bit. All right, next up, we had an Arrhenius graph tested last year, and we had an Arrhenius graph tested this year already, so I don't expect that to come up again, to be honest. Aspirin synthesis went hard in 2024, and you also had recrystallization and the purity practical. So required practical 10A, this was tested, and I believe I've heard from my students that this was also tested this year, which is kind of weird, but they keep repeating the same practical over and over again for some reason. Acids and bases titration curves were tested last year, and these have also been tested this year in paper 2, so I'm pretty sure you're safe that these won't come up again, but who knows at this point. Transition metal colors and colorimetry was tested last year as well. So if transition metals does come up this year, I'm not expecting it to be regarding colorimetry, but considering required practical 10A was tested last year and this year, like I said, who knows? But I'd be going deeper into the other sides of transition metals if possible. So some of the catalysis stuff. So I'm thinking heterogeneous and autocatalysis this year because they tested on homogeneous catalysis in paper 1 last year. So I'd be revising that to see what's going on. Maybe they'll try and combine catalysis with kinetics and rate equations in some way. I don't really know, but keep that in mind. All right. What was tested in paper 3 2023? So we had carboxylic acids preparation of organic liquid. So this was the required practical 10A was tested in 2023, and then 10B, this one's 10B, my bad. And then 10A was tested in 2024. So I'd be highly surprised if they go deeper into carboxylic acids required practical 10A, considering it's come up twice in a row. They may revert back to this, or they may go in a different direction. For example, required practical 5 distillation, and they may go down that route, or they may go back to the organic liquid. Okay, so I'd be revising that stuff. Also revise stuff like esterification, hydrolysis, just in case the carboxylic acid shifts into that kind of stuff. There was a percentage yield calculation tested for paper 3 2023. I expect another amount of substance calculation to come up, some kind of organic one. Okay, what also came up was alcohol dehydration isomerism. This was a bit of a random one, and it was a mixture of a bunch of questions. So again, always something like this can come up where it's like a really weird topic that's kind of small, isomerism. They'll try and link it together if it was absent in paper 1 and 2. Amino acids and TLC chromatography was tested, so maybe this won't come up this year. Who knows? But it's a pretty quick topic to revise as long as you know the main stuff, Zwitter ions, the conditions in acidic and basic environments of the amino acids. And the TLC experiment is pretty damn easy. If you're stressed about it, check out my required practical resource. Required practical 4 and 11 were tested, so test for ions. So maybe that will come up again. I'm not too sure. They've tested a ton of inorganics so far, but there's always a way that they could retest required practical 4 or required practical 11 on you. This is literally a memory game, guys. I don't really know what to say about this. You could always memorize it just to be safe. But who knows, to be honest. Let's see what last year was saying for reactions of aqueous ions. So not very heavy last year. And then in 2023, it was pretty damn high because of that required practical that they tested you on. So you could revise it. They've done a lot of inorganics, so they may lean into that this year. And you've also got period 3 elements, which isn't really that common in paper 3. So if you look at paper 3 up here, if we can find period 3 elements, it's up here, right? It's received zeros for the last 4 years, and there was a 9 markers in 2018. So they may revert back to that because there's been absolutely nothing on period 3, but they don't normally like to test it because it's hard to associate with a practical. So they could either test it standalone as like its own topic without a practical associated, or they could try and link it to required practical 4 and 11 if they want to resurface that. So I would be revising this quickly just to sort of get the grasp of the different observations and tests needed, but I wouldn't go too hard on it. Next up was organic group polarity and boiling point trends. So they could do this with all of the year 12 sort of organics and maybe some of the year 13 functional groups as well. They could revisit this kind of content, but I don't know if this has already been tested in paper 2, so you'd have to double check for yourself. And then lastly, we had an acids and bases like 5 or 6 marker KW calculation. So if there hasn't been any tough, higher level, higher mark acids and bases questions outside of buffers, they may revisit something like this as well. Okay. So I'm thinking there's going to be a mixture of calculation, either from like acids and bases, thermodynamics, amount of substance, some sort of calculation I'm pretty sure is going to come up. And then everything else is kind of a guessing game, to be honest, because paper 3 is pretty hard to nail down. But as you can see, as long as you revise the highest yield topics, starting at the top, working your way down, you should be pretty damn safe. Making sure you go through the required practical knowledge, practicing the required practical questions, you should be completely fine. All right, guys, peace.